Hello, everyone. It's the Grouchy Historian. We're on a roll today, folks. So we're just going to keep rolling with week 4. Okay, now this week I've picked a couple of, I want to call them a little more arcane cases that sometimes only a lawyer can love. But I picked them because the concept of free speech, right? The First Amendment, there are literally dozens of Supreme Court cases that have come up since the passing of, or since the ratification of the Constitution and the amendments of the Bill of Rights over free speech, free association, religious rights, public versus private speech, all of these things. In particular, the idea of free speech and freedom of religion. Okay, these are still fought over in the courts even today. I put this sentence in here because I do have to say our founders would probably have laughed at most of our modern politicians as buffoonish amateurs in the realm of politics. What I find fascinating is listening to pundits and reporters and people who are supposed to be highly educated experts who don't know anything about history, who love to use words like unprecedented, which is in fact is not true. If you look at our history and read our history, the concept of let's just call it dirty politics, biased media, shady business deals, dirty money. Our founders had all of those things. We've sort of sometimes built them up as these, demigods of paragon and virtue, which they did have, but they were also practical people, and they were also sinners who did a lot of, let's just say, questionable activities in the name of politics. Because, I'm the Grouchy Historian, and I don't mince words. But two of the most controversial issues that continue to come up are the idea of freedom of religion and the whole idea of campaign money and finance. Take it from me, when you hear someone complaining about dirty money and dirty politics, talking about the other guy, that's because they don't want the other guy doing it because they're doing it. Okay, anybody who thinks that there's not a whole lot of dirty money and dirty politics on all sides just isn't paying attention. But two cases in particular that I wanted to look at this week that you probably haven't heard of. Both of them have been decided within the last 20 years. So if you don't think recent Supreme Court cases don't have an immediate bearing on you, yes, they do. Okay, that's one of the reasons that I chose these particular cases and the cases that we're going to study in the remaining couple of weeks of this quarter. So this week we chose Burwell versus Hobby Lobby stores. If you've ever heard anybody talk about the Hobby Lobby case, this is the one. And I also chose the Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission. Again, if you've ever heard somebody arguing about Citizens United, that is this particular case. Now, on the surface, these cases deal with very different things, right? Hobby Lobby, in a nutshell, was a case that was brought to the court after the passage of Obamacare, and Obamacare's mandate that all employers had to pay for contraception to their employees. Now, there were very narrow exemptions for overtly religious organizations, which, of course, some parts of the Obama administration still fought. If you've ever heard the story of the Little Sisters of the Poor, that's a subject for another conversation. But Hobby Lobby was a privately held company of people of faith, Protestant Christians, who did not believe in contraception or abortion and did not within their the medical benefits that they provided their employees. Keeping in mind they did provide their employees medical benefits, right, which is not all that usual for a retail store chain. They were sued because they did not provide contraception coverage, which was supposed to be mandated by Obamacare. They went to court, and the court narrowed in Hobby Lobby's favor, that because of the very public, very overt, long-term religious convictions of the owners, they did not have to provide what they considered religiously offensive medical services, which was contraception and abortion. Why is this important? Well, this entered in the whole debate of public versus private speech, and where does one person's rights begin and end versus another person's, right? What is the role of the government in deciding what is considered public accommodation, as it were, and what is considered private? Okay, these are issues that are still fought over the courts today, particularly in the context of religious freedom, religious rights, over things like contraception, abortion, the whole gay issue. These are still things that are likely to continue to come up to the court pretty much forever as the, I will call it the living constitutionalists try to continue to say that whatever the federal government says is how it's got to be, okay? This ties directly into the second case that we looked at this week, which is Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. Now, this again is definitely one of those cases that only an attorney could really love and get into, but it basically looks at the issue of corporations as having the right to use money, in this case, political contributions, and how confidential that they should be kept, right? One of the things that is a continual fight even today, and is highly controversial, is several states, particularly progressive states, trying to get a hold of donor records to find out who is donating to particular political causes that, let's be honest, they don't like, because they want to make those donor lists public so that then they can call out, and I'm going to go into my opinion here, their minions in the social media and public media realm to try to shame and disabuse these people of supporting political causes and political positions they don't like, okay? So there's a very fine line that's continued to be argued about in front of the Supreme Court is what is the right of the state to look at, control, influence, publicize private political donations, and how much should the public know about who is supporting certain political causes and political candidates, right? We already have in place a fairly robust set of campaign finance laws to prevent, let's just call it what it is, somebody from buying and controlling a candidate. Let me think about how that might work. So there's a continual challenge to say, what are people's rights to have their political donations, their political activity protected from what has now become cancel culture, and to participate in the political process. If you look at historically, this actually goes back to the civil rights era, when the old Southern Democratic parties tried to find out which people and organizations were providing funding and support to civil rights organizations, including African Americans in the South at the time, so that they could basically harass them because of their support for the civil rights movements. So this is not a new thing. The idea of just like you are just like you are entitled to a secret vote so that you cannot be intimidated as you go to submit your ballot, there's a constant battle in the courts about whether your other political activities should be subject to surveillance by the state, surveillance by the media, surveillance by other public interest groups, which sometimes are barely disguised other political groups. So that's why I picked these two cases for this week, because the ideas of free speech covers a whole spectrum of situations beyond just what you're allowed to say, what you're allowed to print, or how you're allowed to worship in public, right? Again, if you look at even very recently here through the pandemic, right, there was a number of cases brought before local and federal, state and federal courts about the rights of churchgoers to attend religious services. So again, these are not ancient or old or just historical considerations. The idea of freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press even still affects us now, which is why I chose these two cases for this week. But these are a little tougher to dig into. So see what you can do and see what you think about the merits of these particular cases for this week. And we'll see you again next week.